Before you try to fix your life, there is something more fundamental you may need to fix first. Not your morning routine, not your discipline, not your productivity, not even your motivation. It is really the way you move through the world without actually noticing what is happening. Think about how most self-improvement advice works. You feel behind, so you build a schedule. You feel distracted, so you delete an app. You feel unmotivated, so you search for another video, another system, another 5-step routine. And for a few days, you feel like you are finally taking control. Then something happens. You get an unexpected message. Someone criticizes you. A meeting goes badly. Your plans change. You see someone else succeeding faster than you. You become frustrated, defensive, distracted, or discouraged, and suddenly your carefully designed life starts falling apart. The problem is not always that you lack discipline. Sometimes, you are trying to control your behavior before you have learned to read the situation producing that behavior. And this is where an overlooked Korean concept offers a powerful lesson. There is a Korean word that describes a particular kind of awareness, the ability to notice the atmosphere around you, read subtle signals, understand what is happening beneath the surface, and adjust your response accordingly. It is called Nunchi, but don't reduce it to simply reading people. The deeper idea is learning to pause long enough to notice reality before your emotions, assumptions, or impulses tell you what reality means. That distinction can change everything. Because much of modern self-improvement begins with the question, what should I do? A better question often comes first. What am I actually looking at? If you misread the situation, even perfect discipline can take you in the wrong direction. You can work harder on the wrong goal. You can become more productive at something that does not matter. You can defend yourself against an insult that was never intended. You can chase approval from people whose opinions should never have controlled you. And you can spend years trying to repair a life that was never broken in the way you thought it was. And that is why this idea matters far beyond social situations. It affects the moment you reach for your phone instead of finishing the work, the moment you answer an argument before understanding it, the moment you say yes because you are afraid of disappointing someone, the moment you abandon a goal because one difficult day convinces you that you are failing. In each case, there is a tiny space between what happens and what you do next. Most people rush through that space. This video is about learning to use it. So before we talk about discipline, productivity, confidence, or changing your future, we are going to examine the habit underneath all of them. The habit of noticing. Because sometimes, the first step toward fixing your life is not doing more. It is seeing what you have been doing all along. Most people try to fix their lives by changing what they do. They wake up earlier. They build a stricter routine. They download another productivity app. They promise themselves that this time they will finally become disciplined. But there is a problem with that approach. You can change your behavior without changing the awareness behind it. And when that happens, you may become more efficient at repeating the same mistakes. This is where the Korean idea we introduced begins to become much more interesting. Nunchi is often described as the ability to read the room, to notice subtle expressions, shifts in tone, silence, timing, and the emotional atmosphere around you. But its deeper lesson is not simply about becoming socially perceptive. It is about learning to observe before you act. That sounds simple, but think about how rarely we actually do it. Someone sends you a short text, and you immediately assume they are angry. Your manager gives you unexpected criticism, and you immediately become defensive. A friend becomes distant, and you immediately decide they no longer value you. You wake up tired for several days, and instead of asking what your body or mind might be telling you, you label yourself lazy. In every example, something happens, and your mind instantly creates a story about what it means. Then you react to the story as if it were reality. That is the habit we need to examine. Because the space between an event and your interpretation of that event is where an enormous amount of your life is being decided. And this is where Korean wisdom begins to intersect with one of the oldest ideas in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics understood that we do not simply respond to events. We respond to the judgments we make about those events. Someone insults you. The insult itself is one thing. Your interpretation, they disrespected me. I need to defend myself. I cannot let this go, is something else. The first happened outside you. The second happened inside you. And if you cannot notice the difference, you will constantly hand control of your emotional state to whatever happens around you. Nunchi offers a practical kind of awareness that can interrupt that process. Not by telling you to suppress your emotions. Not by telling you to become passive. And certainly not by telling you to ignore your own needs just to keep everyone else comfortable. Instead, it asks you to notice more carefully. What is actually happening? What am I assuming? What is the other person communicating? What am I communicating without realizing it? What does this situation require from me? Not what does my first emotional impulse demand? That last question is especially important. Because your first impulse is not always your best judgment. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is pride. Sometimes it is insecurity. Sometimes it is exhaustion wearing the mask of anger. And sometimes it is an old pattern responding to a situation that is completely different from the one that created the pattern. If you learn to notice that moment, you create something most people never deliberately build. Choice. You no longer have to react simply because you feel something strongly. You can feel the emotion, observe it, understand it, and then decide what deserves to happen next. That is a very different kind of self-control. And it may explain why some people seem remarkably composed without appearing emotionally detached. They are not necessarily feeling less. They may simply be noticing more before they respond. But there is an uncomfortable question hiding underneath all of this. If awareness is so powerful, why do most self-improvement systems teach us to act first? Why are we constantly told to push harder, optimize more, eliminate distractions, and force ourselves into better habits before we have even learned to understand what is driving our behavior? That question takes us to the next layer, because the habit you are trying to fix may not actually be the habit causing the problem. There is a strange trap built into modern self-improvement. The moment something in your life feels wrong, you assume the answer is to become better at controlling yourself. You need more discipline, more consistency, more willpower, a better routine, a stricter schedule. So you push harder. And when that does not work, you blame yourself for not pushing hard enough. But what if the problem is not that you are failing to control yourself? What if you are trying to control the wrong thing? Imagine someone who constantly checks their phone whenever they sit down to work. They might tell themselves, "I have no discipline," so they delete social media. For a few days, things improve. Then they start checking email, then the news, then random websites. Eventually, they find another distraction. The obvious conclusion is that they need even more discipline. But there is another possibility. Maybe the phone was never the real problem. Maybe the work makes them anxious. Maybe the task is unclear. Maybe they are afraid of producing something imperfect. Maybe they are mentally exhausted. Maybe they simply do not believe the goal matters enough to tolerate the discomfort required to pursue it. Without awareness, all of those possibilities look like the same problem. I am lazy. That label feels convenient because it ends the investigation, but it also prevents the solution. This is where the principle of Nunchi becomes much more useful than another productivity trick. Before changing your behavior, learn to read the situation that produces it. Notice the conditions. Notice your emotional state. Notice the environment. Notice the people involved. Notice what changes immediately before you fall into the behavior you are trying to eliminate. Because behavior rarely appears from nowhere. There is usually a trigger, then an interpretation, then an emotion, then an impulse, then an action, and finally a consequence. Most people try to attack the action. They say, "I need to stop doing this." But if you can learn to notice what happens 2 or 3 steps earlier, you may not have to fight the behavior with nearly as much force. This is also where Stoic thinking becomes practical. The Stoics repeatedly emphasize the importance of examining your impressions before accepting them as truth. Something happens. Your mind immediately gives it meaning. And you have a choice. Accept that first interpretation automatically, or examine it. That small pause is not weakness. It is mental discipline. Consider criticism. Someone tells you that your work needs improvement. Your first reaction might be embarrassment. Then your mind adds a story. They think I am incompetent. Now you feel angry. Then you defend yourself. But what if you had paused before accepting the story? What exactly did they say? What part is factual? What part is interpretation? Is there something useful here? What is actually under your control? The situation has not changed, but your relationship to the situation has. And that is the deeper reason awareness has to come before transformation. You cannot intelligently change something you have never learned to observe. You may accidentally remove a symptom while leaving the cause untouched. You may build a perfect routine around the wrong goal. You may become extremely disciplined while remaining emotionally reactive. You may become productive without becoming fulfilled. And eventually, you wonder why all your effort has not produced the life you expected. The answer may be uncomfortable. You have been optimizing your response without understanding the situation. Nunchi begins somewhere else. It begins with attention, noticing the room, noticing the person, noticing yourself, noticing the moment before the reaction. And once you become capable of seeing that moment clearly, something changes. You are no longer simply asking, how do I force myself to behave differently? You begin asking a far more powerful question. What is this moment actually asking me to notice? And that question leads us to the deeper principle behind this entire practice. The most important part of self-control does not happen when you finally make the right decision. It happens earlier. It happens in the few seconds when you notice what is happening before your mind turns it into a command. That is where Nunchi becomes more than a social skill. It becomes a discipline of awareness. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting. You make a suggestion and the room becomes quiet. Immediately, your mind begins working. They don't like the idea. Maybe I sounded stupid. I should explain myself. I need to defend this. Within seconds, your body has reacted to a meaning that you created. But what if the silence meant something completely different? Maybe people were thinking. Maybe someone was distracted. Maybe the person leading the meeting wanted to consider the suggestion before responding. You do not know yet. And that is the point. You do not know yet. Nunchi asks you to respect that gap. Instead of immediately filling uncertainty with your own assumptions, you observe. You watch. You listen. You allow more information to arrive. This sounds almost insignificant, but it can completely change the way you move through life. Because a large percentage of unnecessary suffering begins when we treat our first interpretation as a fact. Someone doesn't text back. You assume they are ignoring you. Someone gives you feedback. You assume they are attacking you. Someone succeeds. You assume you are falling behind. Your plans change. You assume the day is ruined. The event happens once, but your interpretation can replay it 50 times. And suddenly, you are no longer reacting to reality. You are reacting to the story your mind created about reality. This is where the Korean principle becomes powerful. Notice first, interpret second, respond third. That sequence is simple, but most people reverse it. They interpret first, react second. Then, if the consequences become painful enough, they finally look back and ask what happened. The goal is not to become slow, indecisive, or constantly suspicious of your own thoughts. The goal is to create enough awareness that your first impulse does not automatically become your final action. And this is where the Stoic connection becomes especially useful. Stoicism teaches a similar discipline of separating what happens from the judgment you attach to what happens. You cannot control the event, but you can examine the judgment. You cannot control another person's tone, But you can decide whether that tone deserves your anger. You cannot control whether someone misunderstands you, but you can decide whether you will spend the next 6 hours trying to prove yourself. You cannot control every change in your circumstances, but you can control whether the first emotional reaction becomes the driver of your next decision. This does not mean suppressing emotion. Quite the opposite. Awareness allows you to experience emotion without immediately becoming obedient to it. You can be angry and still pause. You can be anxious and still observe. You can be disappointed and still think clearly. You can feel rejected without immediately rejecting yourself. That is a deeper form of discipline than simply forcing yourself to do what you are supposed to do. Because external discipline controls behavior. Awareness gives you a chance to understand why the behavior is happening in the first place. And once you start practicing this, something unexpected happens. You begin noticing that many of the problems you thought required a complete transformation actually begin much earlier, with a tiny moment of unconscious reaction. The message you answered too quickly. The assumption you never questioned. The argument you did not need to have. The purchase you made because you were emotionally exhausted. The promise you made because you were afraid to disappoint someone. The goal you abandoned because one difficult day convinced you that you were incapable. These moments look small, but repeated thousands of times, they become a life. And that is why this Korean habit deserves to be treated as a foundation. Before you attempt to control your schedule, control your environment, or rebuild your future, learn to recognize the moment when your mind is about to take control of you. Because once you can see that moment clearly, you finally have something that motivation alone cannot give you: a choice. There is an important distinction between noticing what is happening and actually knowing what to do with what you notice. Awareness gives you the pause, but the pause still leaves you with a decision. And this is where the connection between Korean wisdom and Stoic philosophy becomes especially useful. Imagine someone says something that genuinely hurts you. You notice your anger rising. You notice the tension in your body. You notice the urge to respond immediately. That is Nunchi in practice. You are aware of what is happening before the reaction takes over. But awareness alone is not enough. Now comes the Stoic question. What part of this situation actually belongs to me? You cannot control what another person thinks. You cannot control the words they chose. You cannot control whether they understand your intentions. You cannot even control whether they apologize. But you can control what you do with the information you have just received. That distinction creates a completely different relationship with difficult situations. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" you begin asking, "What is actually within my control here?" Instead of, "How do I make them understand me?" you ask, "What response reflects the person I want to be?" And instead of, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" you ask, "What is this feeling showing me?" That is where awareness becomes discipline. Because real self-control is not the ability to prevent yourself from feeling something. It is the ability to experience the feeling without allowing it to make every decision for you. Think about anger. The immature version of self-control says, "I should not be angry." The reactive version says, "I am angry, so I need to do something about it right now." But the more disciplined response is different. "I am angry. Let me understand why, before I decide what this deserves." That single shift can change conversations, relationships, careers, and even the way you see yourself. And there is another reason this matters. Sometimes the thing you are trying to control is not actually controllable. You cannot force someone to respect you. You cannot force someone to choose you. You cannot force a perfect outcome. You cannot guarantee that your hard work will immediately produce the result you want. If you spend your emotional energy fighting those realities, you create a second problem on top of the first. But when awareness meets Stoic discipline, the question changes. You stop asking, "How do I control everything happening around me?" and start asking, "How do I remain deliberate within whatever is happening?" That is a much more powerful form of freedom. Because life will always contain uncertainty. People will misunderstand you. Plans will fail. Opportunities will disappear. Someone will disappoint you. You will disappoint yourself. And there will be days when your motivation disappears completely. The goal, then, is not to build a life where nothing disturbs you. The goal is to become someone who can notice disturbance without immediately surrendering control to it. That is the deeper lesson behind the habit we have been exploring. See clearly, pause deliberately, then choose. But knowing the principle is easy. The real test is whether you can use it when life becomes fast, emotional, uncomfortable, and unpredictable. And that is where we need to take this idea out of philosophy and into ordinary life. Knowing the principle is one thing. Using it when you are tired, irritated, distracted, or emotionally triggered is something else. So how do you actually practice this? Start with the smallest possible moment, the moment before you respond. Someone sends you a message that bothers you. Do not answer immediately. Read it again. Notice what you felt before you decided what it meant. Are you angry, embarrassed, anxious, defensive? Then ask yourself, what do I actually know, and what am I assuming? That question alone can prevent you from turning uncertainty into unnecessary conflict. Try the same thing at work. Your manager gives you criticism. Your first instinct might be to explain yourself. Instead, listen completely. Notice the exact words. Separate the useful information from the emotional story your mind is creating around it. You may discover that criticism is not rejection. It may simply be information. Now take it into your relationships. Someone becomes quieter than usual. Instead of immediately thinking, they're upset with me, observe their tone, their timing, their circumstances, your own insecurity. There may be a reason you have not considered. This does not mean constantly analyzing everyone around you. That would turn awareness into anxiety. The goal is simpler. Do not assume certainty where you only have a guess. You can practice the same principle with yourself. When you feel the urge to procrastinate, don't immediately call yourself lazy. Pause. Ask, what am I avoiding? Maybe the task is boring. Maybe it feels overwhelming. Maybe you are afraid of doing it badly. Maybe you need rest. Maybe the goal itself no longer makes sense. The answer matters because you cannot solve the real problem if you keep giving it the wrong name. You can even build a simple daily practice around this. At the end of each day, think about one moment when you reacted too quickly. Do not judge yourself. Study it. What happened? What did you immediately assume? What did you feel? What did you do? And what might you have noticed if you had paused for 10 seconds? This turns ordinary mistakes into information. And that is one of the most powerful ways to improve. You stop treating every failure as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, you start treating your own behavior as something you can observe and understand. Over time, that changes the quality of your decisions. You become slower to react, but faster to understand. You become less dependent on immediate emotional certainty. And you begin noticing patterns that were previously invisible. The people who consistently drain you, the situations that trigger your insecurity, the environments where you lose focus, the moments when you say yes, despite wanting to say no, the goals you pursue because they genuinely matter, and the goals you pursue because you want someone else to approve of you. That is where this practice becomes much bigger than reading the room. You are learning to read your own life. And once you can see your patterns clearly, you can finally begin changing them deliberately. Because the deepest form of self-improvement is not forcing yourself to become someone else. It is becoming aware enough to understand why you keep becoming the same person in the same situations. And there is one final question left. What happens when this awareness becomes part of your identity rather than just another technique you occasionally remember to use? At first, Nunchi may seem like a small habit. Notice the room. Pay attention to people. Pause before reacting. Question your assumptions. But if you practice it long enough, you begin to realize that it was never really about reading other people. It was about becoming harder to manipulate by your own automatic reactions. That is a much deeper form of self-improvement. Because your life is not shaped only by the major decisions you make once a year. It is shaped by thousands of small moments. The moment you decide whether to answer the message immediately. The moment you decide whether criticism is an attack or information. The moment you decide whether a bad morning means you have failed. The moment you decide whether someone else's success is evidence that you are falling behind. The moment you decide whether discomfort means you should quit, or whether it simply means something matters. Most of those moments are almost invisible, but they accumulate, and eventually, they become your character. This is why awareness comes before transformation. If you cannot see the pattern, you cannot deliberately change the pattern. You can only fight the symptoms. You might become more productive while remaining overwhelmed, more disciplined while pursuing goals you never truly wanted, more socially agreeable while becoming increasingly disconnected from yourself, more successful while still being controlled by other people's approval. From the outside, your life may look improved, but internally, nothing fundamental has changed. Nunchi offers a different starting point. Notice first. Notice what is happening around you. Notice what is happening inside you. Notice the assumptions appearing in your mind. Notice the emotions that arrive before the explanation. Notice what changes your behavior. And then ask, what deserves my response? Not everything deserves one. Not every opinion deserves an argument. Not every inconvenience deserves frustration. Not every uncomfortable feeling requires immediate escape. Not every opportunity deserves a yes. Not every failure deserves a crisis. And not every thought deserves to become a belief. That may be one of the most useful forms of freedom you can develop. Because once you understand that, self-control stops meaning constant force. You don't need to fight yourself every minute of the day. You need to become aware enough to recognize when you are about to move in a direction you will later regret. That is the moment that matters. And this is where the Stoic principle we explored becomes practical. You cannot control the entire world. You cannot control people's opinions, timing, moods, decisions, or reactions. But you can control whether you surrender your attention to them. You can control whether you investigate before assuming. You can control whether you pause before speaking. You can control whether you turn discomfort into information instead of immediately treating it as an enemy. And over time, those choices begin changing your identity. You become someone who listens before defending, someone who observes before judging, someone who thinks before reacting, someone who can experience emotion without becoming completely governed by it. That is not becoming passive. It is becoming deliberate, and there is something else that happens when you live this way. You start needing less external control. You don't need every conversation to go your way. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need every plan to work perfectly. You don't need constant motivation to keep moving. You don't need to eliminate every uncomfortable feeling before taking action. Because you have learned something more valuable. You can meet reality without immediately fighting it. That is why the title of this video matters. Before you fix your life, fix this one Korean habit. Not because Nunchi is some magical secret that will suddenly make everything easy. It won't. Life will still be unpredictable. People will still disappoint you. You will still make mistakes. You will still have days when you lose focus, become emotional, or choose badly. The difference is that you begin noticing those moments sooner. And when you notice them sooner, you have more opportunity to choose differently. That is the real transformation. Not becoming a person who never reacts. Becoming a person who can see the reaction before it becomes the decision. So for the next 7 days, don't try to rebuild your entire life. Don't create another complicated system. Don't add 20 new habits to your schedule. Choose one practice. Whenever something triggers a strong reaction, pause. Ask yourself 3 questions. What actually happened? What am I assuming about what happened? What response is actually within my control? Then choose. Sometimes the right choice will be to speak. Sometimes it will be to walk away. Sometimes it will be to apologize. Sometimes it will be to set a boundary. Sometimes it will be to act immediately. And sometimes the wisest decision will be to do absolutely nothing until you can see clearly. That is the point. Nunchi does not tell you what every situation requires. It teaches you to become attentive enough to recognize what the situation is asking for. And once you develop that awareness, you may discover that the life you were desperately trying to fix did not always need more force. It needed more clarity, more attention, more deliberate choices. Because the person who controls every circumstance does not exist. But the person who learns to control the moment between what happens and what they do next can become remarkably difficult to shake. So before you fix your schedule, fix your habits, fix your productivity, fix your relationships, or try to become a completely different person, learn to notice. Because sometimes the first step toward changing your life is not changing what you do. It is finally seeing why you do it.